You have to have the why conversation with your employees, and you also have to have the what happens when it works conversation, because one of the biggest driving forces against AI implementation or AI adoption is the humans, right?
The AI Grapple, where the future begins.
Welcome to the AI Grapple podcast. My name is Kate Vandervoort from Social Mediology. In today's episode, we have a very special guest who's making waves in the world of generative AI. Jordan Wilson is the founder of Everyday AI, and he joins us to share his immense experience and insights into integrating generative AI into business. With a diverse background that spans multimedia journalism to strategic partnerships with global brands, Jordan brings a unique perspective on making AI accessible to everyone. In this episode, we dive into the real issues he grapples with when helping businesses understand and implement AI, exploring the challenges, ethical considerations, and the future of AI in the workplace. Whether you're just starting with AI or looking to deepen your understanding, Jordan's expertise is worth listening to. I do every day. So let's dive right in. Hi, Jordan. It's great to have you here.
Hey, Kate, thank you so much for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
Look, I want to start by saying that I am a bit of a fan of yours, a big of a fan of yours. When I start anything in business, I always set about finding the best communities to be a part of, the best podcasts to listen to. And as I transitioned into working in AI, your podcast was one of the first that I've come across. And I am an avid listener. Yours is my number one podcast. And you know, it does two things for me. One, you really help me help challenge some of the ideas that I have about AI and certainly around implementation and what that means. But it's also really reaffirming. I'll be driving home from the school drop-off listening to your podcast and I'll go, I do that. And, oh, I've seen that. So it's a daily ritual for me listening to your podcast. So I'm so excited to have you here today.
No, that's great. Yeah, I really appreciate that. You know, especially from another person that talks about AI. That's one of the best compliments. I appreciate that.
Awesome. So I think most of us have transitioned into AI from doing, similar work with businesses. Can you tell us a bit about your journey and AI?
Yeah, for sure. So, I'd say like most people, it kind of happened accidentally. So I have a digital strategy company that I started about 6 years ago, based here in the U.S. in Chicago, and in about late 2020, our team started using different AI technology, right? Specifically, the earlier versions of GPT technology. So, kind of the precursor to Chat GPT in late 2020. So, there's all these tools that essentially had this GPT powered technology. And previously, before starting my own company, I was a journalist. So, one thing that we were using this technology for early on was to help in our content creation processes. So whether that's, helping improve blog posts or helping to more quickly generate, Google ad headlines ideas, whatever it was. And, I saw pretty early on just how powerful it was, especially once you learned how to properly use the technology and understand it. And I really saw the huge jump in quality when you actually stopped to learn, to learn about large language models, to learn about generative AI, to, try different prompting methodologies. I was astonished at how much higher the quality was when you really approached it more like a science, when I think just about everyone approaches it like an art, or just like a blog post writer. A lot of people still, I think treat AI as just that, but it's so much more. I think it's combining art, it's combining science, and it's combining business automation.
I love that we can all still pretty much remember that first moment where you saw the words dancing across the screen and realized that, generative AI was actually or is actually something quite unlike, a lot of what we've seen up until now. I think when we're working in AI all the time, we assume that everybody's across it. And I know we're really at the front of the wave at the moment. We're the early adopters still when it comes to AI. So a lot of people who listen to this podcast are just starting to get their head around what it means for them, what it means for their business, what it means for life. When people are in that place, what are the entry points that you think are the easiest, I guess, for people to discover the power of AI?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's not an easy blanket answer for that, I don't think. However, I will say this: regardless of what you do for a living or the type of work that you might ultimately want to use AI for, I think something that we all do, regardless, is we spend time on the internet, right? So I always encourage people. That's a great entry point, is to just start using AI powered versions of traditional search engines. So whether that's opting for using Google's AI overviews, using Perplexity kind of as an AI answers engine, using ChatGPT's browse with Bing features. I think that's probably one of the best ways, right? Like if you are still absolutely brand new and you're still trying to wrap your head around what AI can do for your career or for your company, like the concept of using the internet is so antiquated, right? Obviously the internet's only been quote unquote mainstream for like 30 plus years, but we're still using it in the same way that we were 25 plus years ago, right? Endless Google searches or endless ask Jeeves searches, right? Whatever searching search engine you were using 10, 15, 20, 25 years ago. But it's still the same, right? Like you go on endless search engine quests, you open so many tabs, you spend so much time, and now the way the internet's built, right? Even that information that you need is just buried, right? Like, I think SEO has kind of killed the internet and how we all use it. So we actually, I think, waste the average person, business person, waste an incredible amount of time, regardless of your industry, just trying to find information on the internet. And that is, I think, one of the easiest, like low hanging fruit, like low risk ways that you can start reaping the benefits of generative AI and large language models almost instantly.
Yeah, I loved the session you did on Microsoft Edge and using Copilot to really engage with websites. That I dabbled with Copilot, but when I started using it in Edge, it really changed a lot about how I use the internet. One of the concepts that I have just loved and run with, that I know that you've shared a lot, is around this concept of how do we do more, be more, increase productivity, lift impact, rather than trying to just get AI to do our jobs for us. And I think that's something that really sets apart a lot of the work that you're doing. A lot of people out there talking about AI is around how can we use it to do our job, do less, do things quicker and faster. Can you talk to us a bit about that concept? Because it's something that I've really embraced and, really share a lot, is how we can do more with AI and be better with AI rather than having it just replace what we don't enjoy.
Mm. Yeah, Kate. I think early on, right? Like I've been doing a daily podcast on AI for like 15 months now, and I think early on there was this gold rush to productivity. And I think that I quickly realized, and also, companies that we consult and companies that we work with quickly realized, like simply chasing productivity. I'm not saying it's a futile effort, but that's not really the point of generative AI implementation. And, it's actually quite a philosophical kind of quest that you have to, or that companies should be going on before they fully implement generative AI. Because, I mean, here's the reality, right? If you're using AI correctly, what you are ultimately doing is you are giving whatever large language model that you may be using, obviously in a safe and secure way, but you're giving it access to your data, right? So with RAG, retrieval augmented generation, so you're essentially giving a model your data, you're teaching it how to essentially operate like an employee, and then the hope is in the coming days, weeks, and months here, as models they're getting exponentially better and smarter and more capable. We are going to see the quote unquote brand name models that we all use every day start to have these autonomous capabilities, to start having reasoning capabilities, much more like the average knowledge worker, right? Much more like you and me. So it is, I think originally it was this rush toward productivity, but now I think you have to have more of a philosophical conversation, both whoever's in charge of implementing AI at your organization and yourself, right? Like I think about this, I talk with people about this all the time, because what we are ultimately doing, and it's not like I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer, but ultimately we are training models to do the work of humans, right? And in many cases, people are providing data and providing guidance and providing training, even in non-technical ways, for companies to in the future not really need those exact same humans that may be working on AI projects right now. So I think it's important when we have this conversation, because I think we've moved well past productivity, and now some of the trendy topics are this concept of augmented in intelligence, and how you can best work with an AI, and yes, how you can still fully embrace AI and not have to worry about it taking your job, right? But I think it really takes a strong-willed person to understand that, okay, it's okay if a large language model in 3 months or 3 years is better than my job, than I have been. Like, that's okay, right? Just like how the internet, if you said 40 years ago that someone with zero knowledge could go on and instantly find out answers that the world's experts didn't necessarily know, like, people would have thought that was a crazy concept. But so I think it's important for people to, in departments and companies, to start having those conversations and say, this is why we are implementing AI. This is what it means for our department. This is what it means for, the future of work in our company. But I think you do have to shift, that point of view away maybe from productivity into what does it mean to have this human AI relationship at our company, and what happens when it works.
Yeah, I really like that, because I actually think productivity is the first kind of introduction to AI, and I think it's a natural place where people can immediately see some benefit. But a lot of the work I do is around the culture change that then needs, and that's what you're really talking about, that culture change that needs to happen within an organization to start moving towards this augmented reality that we're walking into. When you look at it from an ethical and a responsible perspective, because I think, I hear you talk a lot, and I also talk a lot about that human-centered AI, and how do we really take people on that journey? How do you approach that with companies so that you're not coming in and saying, let's replace the whole workforce? You're taking them on a journey that is people focused, and that looks after the people in an organization.
Yeah, and you kind of reference this a little bit, but I think that proper AI implementation, people always think it's a technical aspect, but it's not. It's a change management. That's ultimately what it is. And one thing we always, whether it's companies that just hire us for a couple of hours, or if we're working with companies over the long term, it's conversations that we're having is the why, right? You have to have the why conversation with your employees, and you also have to have the what happens when it works conversation, because one of the biggest driving forces against AI implementation or AI adoption is the humans, right? The humans that maybe don't want to kind of quote unquote go all in on AI, even if it makes their jobs easier, because they feel it makes their jobs less secure. So I think that that's something that the majority of companies, especially here in the US, are missing, is they're not having those important conversations on with their employees on what happens if it works, because that's ultimately one of the main reasons why, right? Like I've talked about this before, but there's all these almost like a dichotomy of studies that's almost mind-boggling, because it's more than 90% of C-suite leaders are saying that AI is a top priority, yet less than 10% of companies have fully implemented generative AI into their companies. So it's like, okay, if more than 90% of people are saying it's a top priority and less than 10% of companies have actually implemented it, like why? And I think because companies rush into productivity and they rush into it as a technical project, and they rush into it with a kind of a tech attitude of yesteryear, right? And looking at it as like how they would implement any other technology, like mobile or cloud or whatever it may be. And that's the exact wrong way to implement generative AI into a company.
And so how do you do that? I mean, is that about creating, the I call them AI advocates within an organization or a company, so that you're, how do you approach that human piece, that culture, that change management, so that you are taking people along that journey, even though some will lose their jobs in that process?
Yeah, I mean it's tough, right? And you can't skip over that, because especially, big companies here in the US, just in the last week, right? You had Intel 15,000 jobs citing AI, Dell 12,000 jobs citing AI. So in the past like week, right, two very big traditional tech companies came out, and that is what people are worried about. So yeah, I mean, one thing we do when we work with companies, we talk to individuals, right? I think we could just roll out training to big companies. An example is we're in the middle of a multi-month journey with a multi-billion-dollar international company and training their employees on ChatGPT. I didn't just throw them in, right? We didn't just throw them into a training and say, here's your training. We had conversations first, right? We talked with people in multiple countries across every single part of their department before we even started training. And we said, hey, essentially having conversations. What are your thoughts on AI? Are you using it? Why or why not? Right? Because, hey, your company's paying us to help you use it more. Right. And, having that conversation, right. It's not like we come in there as the change management people, but even if you are someone who is implementing AI, you have to go in there with that mindset, because if your job, whether it's as an outside third party consultant or advisor, or an internal stakeholder, right? If you are an internal stakeholder at a company that is in charge of AI adoption, like you can't go in there with a mentality of productivity, a mentality of, hey, we're getting this going ASAP, because it'll fail, right? If you want humans to use AI, you have to approach said humans as a human, and talk about AI, because it can be scary, right? The things that you don't understand, uh, it's human nature to be scared of those things, especially as those things day by day, this big black box of generative AI, as that big black box becomes more and more powerful, it also becomes more and more mysterious, right? Like, oh, as these models start to develop, almost human like reasoning and autonomous, AI agent capabilities, it becomes even more and more mysterious, and it becomes a bigger and bigger threat. So that's why I think one of the most important things to do, regardless of what your role is, but if you are trying to implement AI, is focus on the humans, right? You have to, and you have to educate people. That's a huge part of what we do, right? Both doing it for free for the masses, and when companies hire us, is we educate people. We have conversations. Here's what a large language model is. Let's kind of pull the pull the sheet off of this thing and really understand it. And I think when you do that, then people start to understand it a little bit more. And when they start to understand it a little bit more, I think the fear dissipates a little bit. And then maybe you get a little more excitement, and then you get a little more, more and more people using it. And then at that point, I think over time, as long as you stick to your course, all of those other, important KPIs that you care about, I think you'll start to hit them, because productivity is a given. Increased output is a given once you get over that hump. But everyone's just kind of ignoring what it takes to get over that initial hump.
Do you think some of these companies are jumping too soon with major replacement of humans with AI?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on where we're talking about. So, like I said, I'm in Chicago. One of the it's the third or fourth biggest city here in the U.S. And big companies here are racing, right? But then I talk to clients or colleagues or friends in other cities here in the U.S. and they're like, yeah, we're not really feeling this yet. Even in those that are in larger metropolitan cities. I'm not talking about people in rural areas. So I guess it really depends on where you're coming from. So if you're in a huge city, right, like a New York, a London, Barcelona, like if you are in a big international hub of business, I think companies are probably a little more head down and running, especially companies that are publicly traded companies. They probably have a lot more pressure from external stakeholders. That's another thing too, right? You have board members of public and private companies, but larger companies that have boards, and they're just demanding like, hey, go AI something, right? And they don't understand it, but they know like, oh, all these companies, either they're worried about the person behind them catching them with AI, or they're seeing someone in front of them properly implementing AI. So even when boards don't fully understand it, they're still just saying like, oh, hurry, go run and do this AI, right? And ultimately, when you rush those things, it doesn't always, your first or your second attempt at implementation doesn't usually turn out well.
Every time I have these conversations, it just takes me back 15 years ago when I started my social media, community building consulting company. And it's the same conversations. It's the same, the same issues. It's just on steroids. And we don't have 15 years to figure out AI in the same way that, that we did with social media. So, apart from the human aspect, what other challenges are you finding with the companies that you're working with to how they adopt AI or how they integrate that into their company or their business?
Yeah, I think the changes vary because, we've worked with companies as small as 20 people to companies doing 20 billion in revenue. So I think the challenges greatly vary. But I still, going back to my earlier point, I still think it's usually education, right? Because even some of these bigger multi-billion dollar companies that we work with, there's usually one or two super smart people, and a lot of times that's maybe a head of machine learning or whoever is overseeing AI initiatives at the company. So you usually have one person that has a pretty high understanding and a great grasp of how the company should be using AI. But the problem is either that person is too overwhelmed, right? Because they're, again, if they're one of the few, and I've seen this even at really large companies when it's, you think they would have a team of 50 or 100 people, and it's like, oh no, it's a few people, right? At large companies, the ones that are actually pushing, AI or machine learning efforts forward, especially if they were, not traditionally AI or machine learning companies before the generative AI boom, right? That's the companies that I think are really struggling to keep up. Those large companies that didn't have a big AI or machine learning division pre generative AI, those companies are really struggling. And I think what you find is you have a few very bright, very few talented people, and they're either absolutely overwhelmed trying to keep up with everyone else in the company saying like, hey, let's AI this, right? Just using AI as a verb, or their skill set is not necessarily well suited to make them an educator, right? And that's ultimately what you need to do. You need to be having conversations in natural language between your, AI and ML teams and the rest of the people who are going to be using it, right? Like if you're, building on top of one of these companies' APIs, and if you're bringing, your data via RAG or some other methods, if you're bringing your data and combining it with a large language model, and if you're giving these capabilities to hundreds or thousands of employees, generally, like I said, you have a small overwhelmed team doing a great job, and either they don't have time to educate and train others, or that's not their skill set, right? Let's be honest. Sometimes the people who are, you're great data people who are great at machine learning or training models, are not necessarily those who are going to excel in change management, which is ultimately what it takes, right? So, I've been in conversations where you just have those smart people, spitting out, literally like talking like a large language model tokenizes information. And I can tell like that's not, people need an entity or a group to come in and speak plain English and to almost be a liaison between the data people and the decision making people, because I do think, in companies of all sizes, if you do have those two different groups, there's often a disconnect.
And if we take it down even further to those who, when you say they don't have a machine learning specialist, say, what is machine learning? There's a big chunk of businesses that have got not just no AI team or focus, but sometimes even don't have their data and their back end systems in place to really be able to do this well. How, have you got one or two strategies that those kind of businesses that are really at that end of, we don't have a team that's going to help us implement this? How do we even dip our toe in the water to start getting AI capability across the organization, apart from education, which we both know is key?
Sure. I mean, this answer could go for like, I could talk on hours for this, but I'll try to keep it short. So it depends on how your team works, right? So, as an example, if your team, works in Microsoft, and you're a Microsoft organization, so many of those teams aren't using Copilot, right? As an example, maybe if you're on a big sales team and you use Salesforce, so many people are not using, Salesforce's Einstein, capabilities. So, I think sometimes companies and decision makers tend to overcomplicate things, and sometimes you don't always have to build a bespoke solution, because I think early on that's what was trendy and that's what everyone's talking about. Yeah, fine tuning models and RAG and bringing your data and this and that. Well, what about for the data you already have? What about all that data? If you're a Microsoft organization through and through, what about that data that if you give everyone a Microsoft 365 Copilot license, that's going to solve so many of your problems right there? Or if you're a Salesforce organization, give everyone or everyone that needs it a Salesforce Einstein solution, right? Like, I'm not paid by these companies to say these things, but it's just like, I think so many times people are looking in all the wrong places for that first AI step, when the answer could quite literally be under your nose.
Yeah, I mean, that's the first step in four that we always talk about is what are the tools that you already have in your everyday workflow that have AI capability? Because you're right, so many people are not using what's right in front of them. So, Jordan, a question that bounces around in my head a lot and that I grapple with a lot is there a future here where legislation, regulation, I know here in Australia there are whole AI summits happening at the moment that are very focused on things like deep fakes and, um, on very much on the negative side of AI. Is there still a version here where we get beyond the days of the wild, wild west that we're in now and we start to see regulations and constraints put in place that are going to change how we use AI?
So from an international or a worldwide angle, absolutely. I mean, look at the EU AI Act as an example for those European Union countries. It's not into effect yet, but it has been passed, right? So they were kind of the first and maybe the largest kind of multinational efforts to have some sort of AI regulation. So I think the answer to that it's dependent on where you are. I'll speak personally. Here in the U.S., not a chance. There won't be any meaningful legislation. And emphasis on the word legislation. There won't be any meaningful legislation on AI probably in the next, I don't know, 10 years, I would say, minimum, probably a lot longer than that. I mean, here's why, at least in the US, we don't really have a fully functioning government. We don't have, two sides of political parties. There's too much political divide for them to, pass meaningful legislation. So, yeah, there will be things like executive orders, right, which don't require, kind of bipartisan support and a president's signature. We've already seen like some FTC regulations and some different, regulations and fines from different governing bodies, right? Which is different. We've seen social media companies, come out and, have certain policies and regulations, but will there be, at least in the US, laws governing AI? Absolutely not, right? Like something people don't even pay attention to, like social media, right? You were talking about that earlier, Kate. Here in the US, largely, the only kind of social media legislation came before there was social media. It's going back on, I believe the bill's name is Section 230 that was passed in 1996. There hasn't even been widespread new legislation since social media here in the U.S. So I do think copyright law has been under attack. So maybe you might see a stopgap for something like that. But will there be widespread bipartisan legislation in the US? I'd say absolutely not, no time soon. There will be, like I said, things from different governing bodies, but not legislation. But like I said, depending on where you are in the world, different companies I know have been a little more aggressive in policing it and legislation, which I think is probably the right move. But yeah, that's not the route we took here in the United States.
And what about some of these large legal cases that are still unfolding around how some of the models have been trained and the implication for intellectual property and copyright? You just mentioned, is there a version of the world where a company like OpenAI may be compelled to take down part of their model or change it based on some of those court cases that are unfolding?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I think it's highly, I would say it's highly unlikely, right? Probably a pretty landmark case that's still, going on right now is the New York Times versus OpenAI, and I don't see that actually being adjudicated or I don't see that actually going to trial. I see that settling but probably not anytime soon. So I think by the time that intellectual property and copyright law, at least in the US, by the time we kind of quote unquote have an idea of how this will play out with all of these large language model companies, it's going to be too late, right? There's going to be so many, and there already has been so many legacy media companies that have already gone out of business, and there's been so many great sources of information, right? When we talk about intellectual property, when we talk about when we talk about copyright, right? There's this for decades, it's kind of been the same where organizations put out research, they put out their original reporting, they put out essentially information that's helpful for humanity, and then in some ways those organizations you know charge money for it, right? It's been a standard business model. So it could be scholarly journals, it could be newspapers, and having subscription to information behind paywalls. It could be social media sites, right? Paying for premium content, Substacks, whatever it may be, right? So for a long time, there's been this business model, for at least since the internet became quote unquote mainstream, of publishers putting out their content, putting out their information, creating essentially new intelligence, charging people for it. And it was a good and sustainable business model, right? For the most part, you put ads on your site, you charge subscription fees, whatever. And if someone took your content, there was pretty clear ways to prove that. Large language models, it muddies the waters, right? And the other thing is, these companies have more money now than they know what to do with, and they are literally assembling, like, the Avengers of legal teams, right? Like, you wouldn't believe who these quote unquote AI startups, large language models, like, their bench of legal help is it's mind boggling, because they know, right? And they've kind of all but said it, that no, they're challenging, right, copyright law, and they're saying, nope, if it's out there on the internet, we're going to grab it. And we're not violating copyright, because it's not like, for the most part, unless you are quote unquote trying to manipulate models, right? It's not like you can generate a verbatim output, even though you can, right? But that's the argument they're making. So yeah, like, what happens with IP, what happens with copyright, what happens with the future of, right, who's actually going to be paying people to go create this original research, this original content, right? When it seems like on the back end, these large language model makers scoop it up, and then do you even need it? So, obviously over the last year, we've seen a lot of big, 7, 8 figure partnerships with traditional media companies, like Time, like the Associated Press, like the Financial Times, and then, kind of non-traditional or newer age internet companies like Reddit, right? You've seen, like I said, 7, 8 figure annual 7 to 8 figure annual deals with these content publishers, for essentially the models to have either rights to scrape and use that, or exclusive agreements where they're saying, hey, we're the only large language model that gets access to all your information. So yeah, it's going to take a while to see how this all plays out. But I will tell you this: there's going to be a lot of news organizations. There's going to be a lot of online publishers, great research institutions that are they're going to not exist anymore, because by the time this gets figured out, it's going to be too late, right? It's going to be many years. And I think so many companies, especially smaller and medium-sized publishers, that have had this very successful, business model of creating information and charging people for it, and people don't necessarily need it anymore now that there's large language models that just kind of scrape this and ingest it. So yeah, I think unfortunately it's going to be the smaller and the medium size companies that don't have these big, legal budgets like a New York Times. It's going to be those that suffer.
I can't remember where I saw it, but I was also reading about legislation around not being able to patent products that were predominantly created by AI. And I think that creates an enormous dilemma for companies who are empowering their staff and their employees to use AI to develop products and to bring things to market. And then how you determine, well, how much was human input, how much was AI input? One of those other things that people are grappling with at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I think there's been a couple of, cases that said, yes, if you essentially create, a work of art by using AI, you don't have copyright to that, right? And I think another thing people don't pay attention either, right? They don't pay attention to terms of service, So, like, as an example, if we're talking about works of art and creating things, Midjourney, right? Midjourney is a very popular AI image generator where you can just put in, a couple pieces, a couple words, and you can get a very impressive looking photo. So theoretically, when you are using Midjourney, people don't read their terms of service, but Midjourney is essentially saying like, hey, if we spit out copyrighted content, that's on you. Right. I think there's other companies like Adobe, like Microsoft that do take a little bit more, kind of give you a little bit of a legal shield. But then, some companies are like, no, if hey, it's not our fault, right? If you put something out and whether you get sued or if you want to, copyright it and you can't, that's on you, right? So I think a lot of people are so kind of flabbergasted at what AI can create that they don't always take the necessary steps to whether say like, oh yeah, if we create something, can we patent this? Can we copyright this? Can we sell it? Right? I think a lot of people are, skipping over some of those important steps.
Yeah, I think we've got a lot that's going to evolve in that space over the next couple of years. So, Jordan, I could keep talking to you all day, but I know you're at your end of the day. I'm at the beginning of my day. As you stand on the hill and you look out 12 to 18 months, what's coming? What's your view of what's coming down the line with AI?
Oh man, I'll,
Easy
I'll, I'll
question to
try to,
finish.
yeah, I'll try to not talk for super long again. Um, I think very shortly we're going to see model capabilities soar and skyrocket, right? So I'd say, if you point to, let's just say as an example, Chat GPT as kind of the start of the, consumer large language model craze, right? It hasn't even been 2 full years, right? And I think where we are now, a year and a half or, 1 and 7 3/4 years in, um, I think we are going to see more jumps in these models' reasoning capabilities in the next 3 months than we've seen in the first 18. And I don't think it's going to be close because the rate of development, and this is coming from, again, someone that covers AI daily. And I get to talk to these people at these big companies all the time. And the rate of development is it's wild. And so I do see model capabilities just skyrocketing in the very near future. Every single big company essentially has said that they are working on agents. So maybe we'll see that first from OpenAI. We could see an announcement, any hour, any day. We've already seen, Google talk about agents, and their Project Astra. We've seen Meta, openly talk about agents, and it should be arriving soon. So I think autonomous workflows or agentic workflows, are going to be become mainstream, right? And I think they were actually probably a little early on the scene, right? With I mean, great, and I know I'm getting a little technical here, but great companies or apps like LangChain, right? LangChain was maybe one of the first, kind of popular, apps or companies that kind of allowed you to use large language models and kind of build essentially agentic workflows, right? So instead of a human, right, how me and you might sit down and make human decisions and type something and work with a large language model over the course of 2 to 3 hours, right? So instead, it's programming those human interactions that are needed and essentially handing those checkpoints over to a quote unquote separate agent or a separate model. So I think companies like LangChain were maybe too early when the technology wasn't there, even though they were fantastic, right? A year ago, right? The fact that there was technically working AI agents was pretty impressive. But I think once we start to see, these first consumer offerings from the OpenAI, from Google, from Meta, from Amazon, from Anthropic, right? Whoever it is that really puts together that first big AI agentic or autonomous workflow, with a good UI, with a simple UX, that's when I think things both get kind of scary, but also kind of exciting, depending on how you look at it. So yeah, if I had to say like big picture, what am I looking at in the coming, weeks? I don't know. I can't say months, but I guess in the coming weeks or month or two, it's which of the big, kind of four companies are going to get AI agents or autonomously powered large language models. Who's going to get it right first? And all those companies are racing there. That's what they're all openly working toward. Because yes, that does, whether people know it or not, if you're just looking at large language models, one of the biggest hangups is not even necessarily the model. It is the human, right? Like what people like you and I, Kate, as people who are working, in and around AI more than the average person, what we are capable of if you sit us down in front of a Chat GPT or a Claude or a Google Gemini or whatever, it's probably much more than the average person. So, in theory and in practice, one of the biggest hangups for getting the most out of large language models is actually human. It's human intelligence. It's human education. It's employee training. So when you do start to essentially train AI agents on those roles where humans would normally kind of, if I'm being honest, drop the ball, that's when capabilities, I think, can really explode.
Oh, I cannot wait for that. I heard you interview a CEO recently, and he talked about something I do every day on my way home from school drop off. I press the mic button on ChatGPT, and Chatty and I talk for 20 minutes. And by the time I get back to my desk, I have blog posts written, and I have strategies written, and I have new frameworks and models written. And I can't wait for an easier interface to be able to do multiple steps where I don't have to keep talking for 20 minutes or it will stop listening to me.
Yeah, it's
Listen,
it's it's
Jordan,
definitely it's
thank
it's
you.
coming soon and exciting.
Yes, it is. It is. Thank you so much for your time today. I'm so grateful. As I said at the beginning, I am a huge fan, and I just really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today on the podcast.
Absolutely, Kate. Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
And definitely check out Jordan's podcast. It's everydayai.com is where you can find youreverydayai.com is where you can find all of Jordan's amazing interviews, tutorials. There is just so much information on your website for businesses and individuals who are looking to get into AI. So thanks again, Jordan.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the AI Grapple. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends and colleagues and subscribe on your favourite podcast platform. We would love to hear your thoughts, so reach out with any questions or comments about the show. Until next time, keep grappling with AI and stay curious.